Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
There are at least 150,000 fishable ponds or lakes in the state of Kansas, and that would require an ample variety and supply of fish to be stocked. Where do these fish come from? There are only 4 main fish farms in Kansas, and there are 4 state fish hatcheries that only supply the state's public waters. We'll learn more about raising fish on this episode of Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
What is aquaculture?
Aquaculture is basically just like cattle farming, but it's for water, in which we produce numerous things, including fish. We also are able to do things like mussels, salamanders, stream fishes, non-sport fish, things like that. We actually have a native species building going in at our Farlington facility that's in works right now, where we're actually going to do some mussels and some more of our native small stream fishes for restorations. For instance, like when a railroad has an accident and they spill chlorine in the water like they did down here at Harrington, and they need to restore some of those native fish populations, we'll be able to do that. So aquaculture encompasses not only our game fish, but our non-game fish and native species, and also some of those species that you don't think about, such as mussels, salamanders, things like that. So it's really a whole group of aquatic species that we can do in culture. But right here we do mostly sport fish for the fishermen in Kansas.
How large or prevalent is aquaculture in Kansas?
In the state of Kansas, aquaculture represents a little column you would say miscellaneous. It is so insignificant that really there's nothing on the state level, university-wise, that is significant. You might have a few kids at K-State or a few kids at Fort Hays or Emporia State or Pitt State that might take some fisheries or some ecology classes, but there's really nothing for them to step into at the end of that college experience. So aquaculture, although there's there's some opportunity here, there's very few of us doing it, and I suspect that'll always be the case.
What kind of jobs does aquaculture support?
This facility is a manager and 3 biologists that do most of the fish production work. We also have a couple of maintenance positions that we use to take care of all the equipment, the transport vehicles, the pumps, motors, blowers, generators, different associated equipment with the aquaculture of this facility. We also do 7 or so temporaries each season. Most of those are actually out of K-State. People going into the field is what I try to keep here, and normally I don't have a problem with that. You know, obviously if you've got an interest in what you're doing here and want to get some experience, you're going to do a better job, and so we do create quite a few jobs here for that. So, and then we touch a lot of water throughout the state. You know, our economic impact of our fisheries is in the billions according to the latest U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's actually one of the bigger pulls for the state that goes less unknown, that's getting more and more of the word out. I think a lot of the reason why the governor merged tourism in with us was because we didn't do a good job marketing our natural resources, which is one of our biggest assets in the state. You know, deer hunting's huge in this state, but we also have that for the aquaculture side in a lot of our reservoirs and the fisheries. You come up here in the summer to Milford and you go out to the campgrounds and it's like little Nebraska all summer long up here. So, and that's a great thing, you know, it's bringing money into the state.
How do you farm fish?
Simplified process. All of the fish start out as fish eggs. Most of those eggs are collected by aquaculturists, and then we take those eggs and incubate them, turn them into fry. Those fry are then most of the time stocked into a production pond that's managed specifically for those fry to be raised to a larger size. In the case of walleye, we do fry stockings, we do fingerling stockings. We can also take the fingerlings, raise those on feed, and stock them at an 8-inch plus inch fish. Same way with our catfish, we do fry, we do fingerlings, and we do the intermediates, which is an 8-inch fish. It takes a second growing season to get them there. And then depending on the size of the water that's stocked and what kind of fish are present, depends on the size of fish that we stock to hopefully get a year class that next year. So like a lot of our catfish that we raise to a 1/4 pound average apiece, go to our smaller state lakes because that's the size that they need to be to escape predation but from our largemouth bass populations that are in there. So kind of in a nutshell, we do a lot of different sizes of a lot of different warm water species, and where they get stocked depends on what's in that body of water and what we typically can get a recruited fish, which is basically an age 1 fish. All fish are age 0 until the first of the very next year. So right now, all the fish that we produce this season that were fry are still age 0 fish. In the fish community world, that's the way that we do it, because really until they go through their first winter and that they recruit on into that population that next summer, they're really not doing us any good. And that's when they become age 1. And then that's what the guys are out in the field sampling both spring and fall, looking for our young of the year fish, looking at our different size structures and making those adjustments of your regulations and our fish stocking requests that we're filling ultimately for those guys.
What do farmed fish eat?
Certain species come to feed real easily. Catfish happen to be one of those species. We're still using the catfish feeding program that was developed years ago right here in Kansas. Still have one of the greatest strains of catfish. Most of the Midwest wants catfish from us because we have this superior strain of catfish. And years ago, with K-State's help, they manufactured the feed. That's really where commercial catfish industry took off, was here in Kansas. While we don't have a lot of that in our state because we don't have free water, the southern states that do most of our catfish are because of that. We can stock fry of catfish out into a 1-acre pond at about 75,000 fry. We go out once a day, we feed them from the same place, and in about 24 days they'll come up on feed real naturally and just grow to fingerlings. Predaceous fish like largemouth bass, walleye, hybrid striped bass don't necessarily want to eat that dry feed, so what we'll do is we'll take them and condense them into a small tank, and we'll introduce feed every 5 minutes of the day for 20 hours out of the day. The other 4 hours we're cleaning them, taking care of them, picking up the mortalities, doing any treatments that we've got to do. And they don't want to eat that food naturally, so you basically pack them in there real tight, introduce that feed, and then there's, in-tank lighting, some different things that can be done to make them, encourage them to feed off of that feed. A lot of specialty diets. We have mechanical feeders. Actually, I have a new timer system that was built in with my alarm system that's all digital, all PLCs. It gives me the flexibility on something to feed down to 1/10 of a gram at a feeding. Because as you can imagine, I may only start with 5 or 6 pounds of fingerlings in a tank, and I've got to feed them 10% of their body weight in a day, and I need to do that every 5 minutes for a 20-hour period. I don't have a lot of feed necessarily going in there, that small starter diet. And so that new technology has allowed us to actually pulse electricity for our feeders down to the millisecond, which gives us that ability to train them on down to that smaller feed and be more efficient while we're doing it. Most of our fish food is bid on a biannual basis. Unfortunately, Kansas doesn't have a lot of fish food producers in the state, so most of our feed orders here are produced out of state, and it's just got done on the competitive bid system.
What is stock enhancement?
As in, stocking fish to enhance a body of water. That's how I would see that. And a pond is not going to maintain itself without some help. Anything that you do is going to enhance it after a 5 or 6 or 7 year period.
What is a hatchery and why is it important?
A lot of what we do is sport fish, and it's to maintain those sport fish populations in our reservoirs and our small lakes. My job is to raise the fish and supply them based on the request of the management biologist that's actually doing the sampling at the lakes and setting your regulations, requesting the fish to maintain populations. Some of our stockings are new, such as our blue cats. We stock a lot of blue cats nowadays, one, because they eat zebra mussels. While they won't control them, they'll do a good job of eating them. And they've created a nice fishery in most of our reservoirs that have got zebra mussels. We do a lot of maintenance type stockings, such as walleye. We do a lot of walleye to supplement what can naturally occur. A lot of our lakes don't have natural reproduction. They may get reproduction occasionally, but what happens is we help bolster that by increasing the amount of walleye that are available to recruit on up. So a lot of what we do is just maintenance type stockings to maintain populations.
The oceans are fished out, which would be a quick response to that. And if we're going to have affordable protein food source for the planet, we can't afford to feed them beefsteak. So fish has proven to be a commodity that can be raised cost effectively and feed a greater number of people than virtually any other protein source.
Where will these fish go when harvested?
We sell fish in probably 8 or 10 different states. My home range is the eastern half of Kansas. We do go as far as Salt Lake City. When I go and pick up fish that we don't raise here, I could go as far away as Minnesota or Wisconsin, and maybe as far as Arkansas in the other direction.
Are there shipping and transportation laws for fish?
There are. We have our own regulations for transporting within the state. The other states have different regulations. A lot of it's just to prevent the movement of unwanted species such as zebra mussels or some other plants that you don't want to transport. Yeah, what we do here has gotten a lot more difficult in moving fish around, the kind of water that we use, the treatments that we have to go through and things like that.
You run into more DOT regulations than you do anything else, which is not specific to hauling fish. I have to comply with the same laws and regulations that somebody hauling hay or something else would, because once you cross state lines and once you start if you go past state lines or go so far from home, then you are looking down the barrel of all sorts of things. So the regulations are DOT related, but there's also certain regulations of bringing fish into states. I mentioned Salt Lake City. Probably no state is tougher than Utah as far as bringing stuff in. We have to get all our paperwork ducks in order as far as disease and unwanted aquatic invasive species of all sorts. So yeah, you don't just jump in a vehicle and take off, that's for sure.
From start to finish, how long does it take to raise fish for market?
Our marketplace is somebody's pond or lake. There's really not a food fish industry per se in the state of Kansas. No approved processing plants. The fish I mentioned in the freezer are going for this benefit fish fry, but the irony of it is we don't sell fish for consumption. If they want to butcher them themselves, once they're big enough, that's fine. But the majority of them we sell when they're much smaller, and they're going in to ponds and lakes to subsequently grow, and then they can catch out, dynamite out, whatever they want to do with their fish at that point.
Is fish farming profitable?
No. And that's a direct quote from a guy at K-State that spoke at our annual meeting that fields questions all the time about. I will say this, if you're willing to start out as a hobby and start cheapening your own grocery bill and then attempt on a part-time basis to fill some niche market somewhere, it can grow into something that can be profitable. But it certainly takes a special type of person. It takes a person that's going to have to be willing to be in it for the long haul, as well as think, well, I can derive other benefits out of this. You know, I enjoy being out in the elements. I enjoy seining fish. I enjoy meeting people and helping with their ponds and lakes and things like that. But it will parallel traditional agriculture in a great number of areas. The lack of a centralized marketplace is the number one problem facing anybody in aquaculture in this day and age. But as a guy pointed out to me once upon a time, but by the same token, your greatest opportunity, and boy was he right, because you set the bar where you want to as far as what you're going to charge, and you will probably go out of business quicker by not holding your prices up than you will deciding what you have to make it worth your time and then taking care of your people. If you're willing to do that and hang in there, you can make it in this industry, but it's certainly not for everybody.
Are fish farms and hatcheries monitored and regulated by the government?
Yes, we follow all the FDA guidelines for medicated feed, chemical usage. We actually lease this property from the Corps, so I'm actually subject to all of their great inspections and safety inspections and ergo inspections, and as you said, we are a state agency. We are in the fisheries division. We are fortunate that all of our funding is A, license sales, which is where your fishing license money goes, and B, our federal excise tax on your hunting and fishing related items. And between those two sources, we don't get any state general fund money or any of your tax dollars outside of your excise tax on sporting equipment. And if you buy a fishing license, this is where your money's going. You know, and we try to, you know, keep wise use of that money and do as much for the sportsmen as we can to create the fisheries that they need to, you know, at the end of the week they want to go unwind. And you know, it's hard for us being caught up here and not getting to see that sometimes. And so it's nice in the fall when we get out and we stock some fish and we have people run up to the truck and, you know, and you see a little kid catching a fish for the first time. And you know, it reminds me a lot after sitting in that office for most of the year of why I do what I do. And you know, while I don't fish as much as I used to because I work around fish every day, you know, it's really a satisfying job when you go to one of those places and you get to see that, or you see the guy that, you know, he's just unwinding after a hard week's of work, and you know, he thanks you for what you do. And you know, it's kind of the unglamorous part of our job, but it really is a nice reminder of what we do.
We are so fortunate here in Kansas in that regard. Right now, we can operate without a lot of interference from regulatory folks. The degree of regulatory abuse in Kansas is minuscule. However, you don't have to get too far away from the Midwest to find out that's not the case. So anyway, if you're willing to, you know, just use common sense. If a person doesn't make it in this industry in the state, it's not because we're overregulated. I would never contend that. They don't come into play very much unless you start shipping out of state or sell to a governmental entity, and then you start, they might have some requirements. Wildlife and Parks, for instance, which we all do business with, they might have a hoop or two for us to jump through that we wouldn't if as opposed to maybe selling something to one of my neighbors, you know.
What are the most common types of fish raised in commercial hatcheries?
Channel catfish, hybrid striped bass, also known as wipers. You start getting into western states, you're looking at trout and stuff in the trout and salmon family. But I would have to say that at least stuff that ends up on a dinner plate, people like channel catfish, hybrid striped bass, tilapia is becoming very common as far as something raised in aquaculture. And getting back to that aquaponics thing, something that seems to be the most practical fish component of that aquaponics equation. Certain species work, certain don't, but you're going to see tilapia in the places that are actually making the thing work.
We do about 150,000 catfish fingerlings. We do a couple ponds of those each year. From fry to fingerling, that starts in June. Our Pratt facility does all the catfish spawning. They do millions of fry each year. Those fingerlings are then stocked into these raceways each fall in late October, early November at 30,000 per raceway. We typically do 9 raceways, so 270,000 in, 70% out. So, you know, we're running somewhere in that 175,000, 185,000 catfish out every fall to our smaller lakes. And that's what we do at our facility. Each kind of facility in the state kind of covers their own area of stocking to keep us from running clear to Dodge City, and it keeps me from running to Coffeyville and things like that. And so we're the farthest north. We take care of most of the north half of the state.
Are certain types easier to raise than others?
Yes. I really enjoy raising channel cat. They're as long as you know, kind of stay within the guidelines of what's practical, they are as easy as anything. You're looking for something that you can incorporate as cheap of protein source as possible. And it costs less to raise channel catfish pelleted food than it does largemouth bass swimming live food in the forms of, you know, crayfish and other small fish. So you want something not only that you can have as cheap a food source as possible, but you want a situation where you can raise more than one type of fish in that pond at the same time. The term polyculture is just simply that, more than one crop. In every pond that we raise channel cat in, we're also raising crayfish. We're also raising fathead minnows, or otherwise known as forage minnows. So that particular combination works well.
Do fish receive antibiotics? Is it profitable to treat a sick fish?
We do use some antibiotics. We follow all the rules set forth by the FDA. In fact, all of our antibiotic feed in 2017 is going to a veterinary feed directive, which means I basically will now have to have a veterinary write me the prescription to use that feed. I do have a veterinarian that I work with locally that I've worked with to get hormones and things that I can't get through my profession that I need, that I have on board that has been out, and we've established a veterinary client relationship so that she's not real familiar with the fish end of the business, as you can imagine, because vets aren't real trained in aquaculture, but I've brought her up to speed. We work together. She's going to come out, and yes, I'll have to go through all those regulations. But yeah, at our facility we run through about 4 tons of medicated feed, mostly in the summertime with our catfish when a Colmenares outbreak occurs or an Aeromonas outbreak occurs. You know, the fish, typical fish mortalities in one of these runs in the summertime should be less than 10 per day. So if we come in and there's 20 or 30, we know to pull some fish out, take a look at them, see if it's a parasite infection or a bacterial infection, through our internal, external diagnosis. We can determine that in our lab and then prescribe the treatment that we want.
Raising fish through aquaculture has been proven to be an efficient way to provide a high-protein food source. In the near future, will aquaponics, which combines water-based planting and fish cultivation, become a popular, sustainable method of agriculture? Next time you're out fishing on your favorite pond or lake, be sure to keep in mind the efforts of the local fish farmer and the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism to provide that next great catch. Remember, you can see every program of this series by going to SmokyHillsTV.org. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, and this has been Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.